Vinnie Iorio continues to impress down in Hershey.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, I have part two of my interview with Mike Vogel as we talk about the future of the head coaching position for the Washington Capitals. And then we talk about what this team is going to look like next season. But just to get it going here, talking about Vincent Iorio, a young guy on the Capitals, a blue liner that has great potential. I think that we will probably see him on the big team up in DC sooner than later. And that is one of the things that we've heard about for the longest time, is that this team wants to get younger and it wants to get faster. Well, Vinny continues to impress down in Hershey, and just taking a look at him at only 20 years old. Vincent, 20 years old, made his pro hockey debut with the Bears in 22-23, just over a year after the Caps selected him in the second round of the 2021 NHL draft. The British Columbia native was a productive blue liner in the WHL during his high school age seasons, posting a plus 24 rating and 21 goals and 61 assists in 109 games across 4 years, writes NBC Sports Washington. So even at a young age, he had great potential, and that is really manifesting as we see him play in the Calder Cup playoffs here. So I'm excited about what Vinny has in his game. He was one of the few young players that actually got their call up this year. And in his brief snippet with the Capitals, I got to say, I was rather impressed. After participating in the Caps development camp each of the last 2 years, he finally made the jump to the pros in 22-23 and carved out several key roles on the Hershey roster. He tallied 22 points in 63 games during the regular season, ranking 5th among all AHL rookie defensemen with a plus 17 rating. Pretty impressive for such a young guy to be poised with that kind of confidence and just to impress right away at a young age. Oftentimes you see these players and it takes them years to find their way. I think Vinny has it in the tank already, and that is what is promising for me. It's been good, Iorio said, after an early May practice of his first season. Rookie years always have ups and downs, and I think I've had plenty of ups and downs, but having the veteran leadership and a veteran group that we have here, they've really helped me, whether that just for all the young guys, they've taken us and they've treated us so well. They've really helped us learn the ropes. And that is the case, especially in the AHL and the ECHL, is that you think to yourself, it's primarily just young guys, but there is also a veteran core down there. See Scarboza, who got a new contract that's in his 30s now. So even though it is the AHL, you still need to sprinkle in some experience, and that is where that is good for like a Scarboza to serve as a mentor for some of these younger players. And just the thing that I've noticed about a lot of these younger players is they're mature beyond their years. And what do I mean when I say that is, even if you take a look at Connor Bedard and what he had to say, just a really humble guy, or even Connor McMichael showing leadership qualities at such a young age. I think it's a little bit different than it was years ago, where you saw a bit of more immaturity. So a positive sign, suffices to say. Iorio got his first taste of NHL action March 4th against the San Jose Sharks in the same game where fellow defensemen Rasmus Sandin and Gabriel Carlsson made their Caps debuts. All three players logged at least 1 point in the 8-3 Washington victory. Vinny, who served up Alex Ovechkin with a primary assist for a goal, number 815 of the great eight's career. You got to think that that is something that he will hold in fond regard in his heart for probably forever. That long after Alex Ovechkin hangs up the skates, he can say, yeah, I helped Alex Ovechkin score one of his goals. And just it had to be a pretty cool moment for such a young guy, I've got to imagine. He's obviously a great skater and really poised with the puck. Carlson said it's his first pro year. I think he's improved a lot. I started off the year paired with him, and you could see some tendencies from junior still there. And throughout the year, he's improved a lot. It's been a lot of fun to see him up here and also in the NHL and do well. So just continuing, he can improve his game, and he's going to be a great defenseman for the Caps. This is what I've talked about. There is going to be a bit of a transition as we see some of the older players move on. Like I spoke on previous podcasts, I do think that you will see Backstrom and Oshie and some of these older players kind of filter out as the years go. And as those older players filter out, you are going to see more of a youth infusion. You're going to see Vinnie Iorios. You're going to see Hendrik Slop here. You're going to see Connor McMichael plus, Ivan Miroshnichenko and these different players that they're drafting. So I do think that the face of this team is going to change quite a bit in the next handful of years. And I think that Vinny is going to be one of the key pieces in that changing of the guard, if you will. And he's just continuing to light it up as we see the success that Hershey has had in the Calder Cup playoffs. I will let you know that I'm recording this on Thursday here on the 12th, Friday. So things may have changed as far as the Calder Cup goes between when I'm recording this and when this is actually broadcast. But as it stands right now, the Hershey Bears are continuing to chug right along and doing really great things. And they're doing that in large part by a really great head coach, who you could argue would be potentially the next great head coach of the Caps. But not just that, it's players like Vinnie Iorio and just everyone down in Hershey. I don't want to just pinpoint one player, but it just seems like a team all collectively pulling on the rope, and you're starting to see that manifest out on the ice. Listed as 6'4" and 200 pounds, Vinny has always used his size to his advantage on the ice. Between his rookie AHL season and his time with the Caps, he's realized he still has plenty of work to do in the weight room, and that's kind of the common denominator that you hear with a lot of these younger players, is that they need to hit the weight room because, oftentimes they get driven off the puck. So that would serve them well to do that as well. It's been good, Vinny said after an early May practice, talking about, how he's come along, and just kind of, he was reminiscing about how his game has come along. And I've just noticed it as well, watching different highlight packages from down in Hershey. I don't get a chance to watch all the games. I try to watch as many as I can. And I really like his game and what he brings to the tank. Just to continue my game, continue to get stronger. Iorio said of his plans of what he's going to do in the offseason. I'm still a young kid. I'm a big boy on the ice, but there's been that adjustment, pushing your weight around. So I need, honestly, to just work on all facets of my game, keep my mental game strong, but physically get a lot bigger, continue to develop, and get faster. That is what we saw last training camp with Connor McMichael and Hendrik Slop here. You saw them bulk up a little bit because they were driven off the puck when they did get their opportunities with the Caps. When, a big NHLer just, laid it to them, they kind of just folded like a deck of cards. That's why these guys got to bulk up. If you take a look at Tom Wilson and some of his earliest photos when he was first on the Caps, he wasn't always the big tough guy that he is today. He is a guy that also had to bulk up as well. So I think that's sound advice for any of those young guys that are having issues that way, is just to kind of bulk up, and it's going to be advantageous for you, as it's going to be harder for some of the bigger guys in the NHL to drive you off the puck. That would be, the best advice I could give them. All right, so after the break here, it will be part 2 of my interview with Mike Vogel. A bit of a note here is that the audio was not the best. I was having internet issues, but you can still hear Mike Vogel crystal clear, and we will talk to him after the break. Today's episode is brought to you by a product that I use literally every day, AG1 by Athletic Greens. Maybe you're like me. You want to eat healthy and eat well, but it's always easier said than done. That's no longer the case with AG1. With one delicious scoop of AG1 in a glass of water each day, you're absorbing 75 high quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients helps support your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging, all of these things. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with a convenient daily nutrition. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1 year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL network to take ownership over your health and pick up on the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and follow or subscribe to Locked On Capitals on your podcatcher of choice, as I have a lot of great interviews lined up for you this summer. We'll talk about free agency, we'll talk about the draft, and ultimately, what will this team look like next season? So make sure and join Locked On Capitals today.
From October, November of 2021 for sure. And then, like you said, Dan, that there's just not a lot of consistency to his career, and we've seen it in the playoffs too. You know, he was good enough to win the Conn Smythe Trophy in 2018. That could have gone to him. That could have gone to Ovechkin. That could have gone Hopi, I think. But he had a couple of playoffs before that where you had to wonder, did we see the real Kuznetsov? Where was he? What kind of impact could he have made on that game or that series or that series? You know, there were some series where he looked a little disinterested before they won the cup. And you know, look, everybody's wired differently too. And the other thing about Evgeny is he's come right out and said it. I don't want to be one of the best players in the game because I got to work too hard to do that. So knowing that, you've got a very mercurial player here. You've got a guy who's capable of being better than he is, and is vocal about the fact that I'm good enough. I'm good enough for my liking. I'm fine with what I am. And you've also got a guy who now I believe is 30 or close to it, maybe even 31. And he's underperforming. He's certainly underperformed this last season, and I would say in particular in the last quarter of the season. Nick Dowd had more points in the month of March than Evgeny Kuznetsov did in the same month, and the team needed, you know, they weren't dead in the water yet. They needed that, you know, some performances from some key guys, and they didn't get it. And that's why we're talking now instead of a few weeks from now, maybe.
Right.
So yeah, I just don't know. I don't think you can count on, especially, you know, I don't think you can count on a first time NHL coach having the gravitas and the swagger to come in and say, okay, I'm going to fix this guy, Evgeny Kuznetsov. I think I know how to reach him, how to get to him. I think you're going to have a better chance of achieving that with a guy who's been around the block a few times and has maybe won a cup. And I'm not saying they should go out and hire Daryl Sutter, because I don't think they should. But you know, I think that this is going to be a really difficult summer because, again, they're trying to walk a tightrope. They're trying to contend with a roster that screams rebuild, and they're also, you know, seeking a new coach. And when you've got a team that's sort of at a crossroads, you know, that's right on the cusp of, you know, rebuilding, like a full-on rebuild, because you've got a couple of guys, more than a couple of guys, a handful of guys who are going to age out of the game here in the next half decade. That makes this a real tricky hire. So between the tricky hire, the stated goal of competing for the playoffs, and the problems as far as the contracts and the salary cap and everything, that they've got their work cut out for them this summer. It's going to be very difficult, and that part of the equation, the Kuznetsov part of the equation, is just another one of those things. I could see him if they did get a coach I'm sure that's going to come up in the job interview for sure, right? I think it would have to. You've got to bring that up. He's still a part of the team. You've got to ask that question. I think
Mhm.
of whomever you interview, that's going to be one of several dozen questions that you're going to ask. But that being the case, I don't think you can. This goes back to it. You're trying to thread the needle here. You're walking a tightrope. This is not going to be easy, and you don't have a lot of margin for error. You can't make a whole lot of mistakes, and it goes back to the previous question too. If you anoint Connor McMichael or Hendrix Lapierre and they're not ready to produce over 82 games, you're you're in a tough spot. But that goes for any of these decisions. If you hire the wrong coach, if you make the wrong trade, if you think you can't find a trade in the trade market, so you've got to come back with Evgeny Kuznetsov in your top six in September and October, and you're counting on this new coach, whomever that is, to bring him back to the player that we all know he can be. That's a whole lot of ifs, and there's already enough of them here already. So I think like I said, this is for me. It's going to be one of the more interesting off seasons. I think, um, certainly in the franchise's history, but in the franchise's recent history. And you go back to the summer of 2017, the year before they won the cup. A lot of people were way down on this team because of the loss and because they had lost Nate Schmidt in the expansion draft. Lost a couple of players. They had to trade Marcus Johansson to New Jersey to sign some of the contracts that we're getting around to talking about now as being a little bit burdensome, right? Oshie, Kuznetsov, etc. So, um, yeah, here we are. There's a lot of tough questions surrounding this team right now, and are likely to be hanging out there probably for another couple of months.
So the interesting thing about this core, and I think that a lot of Capitals fans are reluctant, to let go of them. I know the fans don't have anything to say with it, but you take a look at Backstrom and Oshie and some of these players that are, the hanger-on of the 2018 Stanley Cup championship team. Their value too far diminished now, even if they wanted to trade them. One of the things I did in this show is I had my three untouchables on this team. It was Alex Ovechkin, Tom Wilson, and John Carl. Everyone else they should be willing to at least listen to. If you take a look at Nick Backstrom, even if they wanted to trade him right now, everyone knows that he had a hip resurfacing procedure done. Everyone knows that TJ Oshie is prone to injury. So it is a difficult position for the Caps to be in. That is for sure. And, a total rebuild isn't, all that anyway. Take a look at the Washington Nationals, for example. It's going to be some tough sledding there for quite some time. So taking a look at the head coach here briefly while I have you here, is there's some front runners. I heard about Spencer Carberry. I heard that even Bruce Boudreau, Gabby, that might even be a possibility. What are some of the head coaches that you see, or who do you think they should interview?
Well, I think they should interview Halpern. I think they should interview Carberry. If Bruce wants to coach, if Bruce wants to continue as a coach, why not talk to him? He fits, the bill of a guy who's been around the block, has had a lot of success, hasn't won a cup. But as I look out there now, the only guys that you're looking at who are sitting on the shelves, who have cup rings, and who could come in and coach this team, they've got some taint on them too, because guys like Mike Babcock and Joel Quenneville, you don't know if they're ever going to coach in this league again.
All right, so after the break, I will continue my conversation with Mike Vogel as we talk about what will this Capitals team look like at the start of next season. We'll talk about that coming up. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last minute tickets and their best prices, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have One of the things that I love about Game Time is sometimes it's difficult to find tickets for those events that you need to want to go to. That is why you need Game Time. It makes it so convenient. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. That's a great deal just for signing up for Game Time. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
I don't know if any team wants to take that PR hit. Typically, I think when you look when you're wondering about who your next coach is going to be, and it's this time of year when a lot of the guys that you might want to bring in and talk to are still working, like Carberry, or just finished working, like Halpern. You wonder, like, if things go sour any of these places, are any of these guys going to get let go?
Exactly.
What happens in New York with Gerard Gallant from the Rangers getting knocked out in the first round at the hands of a crosstown rival? I think there's some question about that. I don't know. Does he make any more sense than any of the guys that we've already mentioned? And then you look around. There's a few other teams that have let coaches go. Brad Larson, Dallas Eakin, Daryl Sutter. To me, those guys don't move the needle
Yeah.
for what the Caps are looking for. So I don't think it's fair to waste their time or yours to bring them in unless I'm missing something about that's in the background of those three guys that makes them a great candidate for this job, this team right now. And I don't know that. So I think another guy I think I would have him talk to, and this could be a guy who's going to get a look in Calgary anyways, a guy named Mitch Love, who's been coaching the Calgary farm team, and I think he won the Coach of the Year award in the American League each of the last 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken. So I think a guy like that who's won at that level and has achieved at that level. I mean, that's you look at the list of guys who've won that Coach of the Year in the American Hockey League over the last 2 decades. Essentially, 90% of them have gone on to coach in the NHL. So there's something to be said for using that as a little bit, and the Caps are guilty of that too. That's how they hired Bruce Cassidy back in the summer of 2002. He was coming off in Grand Rapids Coach of the Year in the American League. So for me, that's how you go about making that list. I don't think that the coaching choices are as obvious right now as they were 9 years ago. Right now, when Barry Trotz was a couple of weeks away from being hired, because I can remember the end of that season, talking with coworkers and others, and saying, looking at the standings and saying, boy, Nashville's struggling. If they miss the playoffs and Barry Trotz gets let go, that's the obvious choice for Washington's next coach. We were saying that in February and March of that year, and by the end of May, he was the Caps coach. It was that cut and dried. The question was who was going to replace George McPhee. I think everyone knew that once Adam Oates was let go and Barry Trotz was on the unemployment line, that I think most people understood that Trotz was going to get the job in Washington. That's not the case now. I think we're back to probably when Adam Oates was hired, or when Bruce Cassidy was hired. I think they're gonna have to cast a wider net, and they're probably gonna have to roll the dice on someone, because I don't think there's someone out here that checks every box for them. I don't see a guy, one single guy. I think you're going to have to build a staff. And let's not forget, when you look at the 3 guys who walked out the door last week, Peter Laviolette, Kevin McCarthy, Blaine Forsythe, you're talking about close to 70 years worth of NHL experience combined with the 3 of those guys. You can't just come and grab 3 guys who've never been who haven't spent much time in the NHL. Maybe one of them's never even been in the NHL. There's going to have to be some sort of veteran presence, if you will, on that staff somewhere. Maybe somebody who's had some previous head coaching experience. Let's go back to when Todd Reardon was elevated from associate coach to head coach. They hedged their bet by hiring Scotty Arniel, a guy who had been a head coach previously at Columbus, to be an assistant, so that you've at least got someone behind the bench that's been there and had that experience previously. I think that's sort of what they're going to have to do this time around too.
It is. I think that take a look at Orpik and how much that changed the Caps blue line. But take a look at the blunders, if you will, the Antha trade for Jacob Vrana, Richard Panik, and draft picks. Not quite hard Philip blunder up there. And you got to think on the whole Anthony Antha thing, that is for sure. Your outlook for, I know we're a long way from next season, but do you see this team being competitive? Is there any chance they make it to the playoffs?
Well, I don't think it's way too soon to tell, Dan. I think you don't even know what your roster looks like yet. So for me, that's a question for September or even maybe mid-July. But I don't think you can say what any team's chances are for next season at on May 3rd. I think we're way too far away, and there's essentially team building happens from mid-June to mid-July. That's just the way the NHL is and has been since that CBA came in the summer of 2005 and changed everything with the salary cap. I think you used to be if you were dealt a bad hand, or like you said, you made some bad trades and you made some mistakes in your summer assessment of your team, and you got into the season and you got off to a bad start. In the old days, in the pre-salary cap days, there were a lot of trades that happened in the month of November because teams would they'd get off to slow starts and they'd call up another GM and say, hey, let's you need to rearrange your furniture. We need to rearrange ours. You give me two guys, I'll give you two guys. And those deals happened all the time. Chris Simon came to Washington in one of those deals. Andre Nicolishin, Michael Nylander the second time around. Those deals that they were frequent. Larry Murphy came in an early season trade, but you just can't do that anymore. So yeah, I'm going to have to hold off on proclaiming anybody playoff worthy or not until I see what at least 95 to 98% of their roster is going to look like, and I don't think we're going to know that until mid-July probably.
All right, Mike, I want to thank you once again for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'd love to have you on before the start of the season or maybe during training camp if you're available to see what this lineup looks like and your thoughts on the team. But where can we find you online?
Vokes Caps on Twitter and Dump and Chase on washcaps.com or washingtoncaps.com.
All right, I want to thank you for joining me once again on this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it is your team every day. Are you an everydayer of Locked On Capitals? I would love to hear from you. Just hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Caps and say, hey, Dan, I'm an everydayer of Locked On Caps. And listen, I love talking to you guys on this podcast, but I would also love to talk to you outside of this podcast. Come and join me on Subtext. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the information scrolling across the bottom of the screen. If you're listening on the audio side, I will have more information in the show notes. So join me on Subtext today. When you're done listening to this podcast, make sure and head on over to Locked On NHL. They're covering the Stanley Cup playoffs. So if you want to be in the know when it comes to the NHL, head on over to Locked On NHL. And for DC fans, it is baseball season. Head on over to Locked On Nationals and be in the know when it comes to the Washington Nationals, as this team is in the middle of a rebuild, but they are showing signs of promise. So head on over to Locked On Nationals. My name is Dan Holme of Locked On Capitals, where it is your team every day. And I'll talk to you next time.